Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says a proposal for a new oil pipeline in Canada is highly likely. His words. Former Energy Secretary under Donald Trump, Dan Brouillette, joins me now. So, Dan, if it happens, and that's a big if, what does that mean for American energy?
The East-West Pipeline, a project that might appear to be a domestic infrastructure effort by Ottawa, is in reality a signal. With every weld placed and every kilometer completed, what the United States hears is not just construction, but the sound of losing control. For decades, Washington got used to Canada's crude flowing south, a setup that allowed the U.S. to regulate, distribute, and profit from its intermediary position. But the East-West Pipeline threatens to erase that role with a single route, from Alberta to British Columbia, straight out to the Pacific. And once the eastern segment connects to Quebec and the Atlantic, Canadian oil could bypass the U.S. entirely. Refineries in Texas, shipping ports in Louisiana, export hubs in Illinois, all risk becoming obsolete. In Washington, optimists once believed Canada wouldn't dare detach itself from the U.S. market. But Ottawa isn't just daring. They are actively designing a future where the United States no longer figures into the energy equation. And it couldn't come at a worse time. With Trump-era tariffs on steel, auto parts, and energy imports, Canada has stopped responding with statements and started responding with pipelines. As the flow begins to shift, countries across Asia, Japan, South Korea, even China, are quietly drafting new MOUs with Canada. They no longer need an American middleman. What they need is stability, a partner who doesn't change strategy with every election cycle. Ottawa is proving it can be that partner. American refineries are already feeling the heat. Several facilities in the Midwest report production drops of up to 14% due to inconsistent feedstock. Input costs are rising, but more than that, what's rising is uncertainty. When contracts are no longer long-term, when supply routes can reverse at any moment, the real damage isn't just to profits, it's to strategic planning. It doesn't end with oil. States like Texas and Louisiana are reevaluating expansion plans for petrochemical zones. Without preferred access to Canadian crude, investment becomes a gamble. Meanwhile, in Brussels and Seoul, new negotiations are underway. Notably absent, the United States. Present, Canada, offering 10-year energy supply guarantees and preferential deals under new free trade frameworks. And while Congress debates tariffs and domestic job quotas, the rest of the world is redrawing energy routes. The U.S. once played the gatekeeper of North American refining. But when Canada finds its own door to the ocean, that gatekeeping power vanishes. No announcement, no sanctions, just a silent transition. One shipment, one contract, one rerouted barrel at a time. Behind the scenes, geopolitical ripple effects are mounting. Analysts in Washington warn that Canada could leverage this new independence to deepen its energy alliances with the EU or Indo-Pacific region. If Canada secures long-term deals with South Korea or Germany, backed by East-West capacity, the U.S. risks being left out of the next generation of energy partnerships. No longer a hub, no longer essential. Just another bidder in a competitive, oversupplied market. Even more concerning is the long-term erosion of influence. When energy is no longer tied to American infrastructure, neither are the geopolitical favors that come with it. The East-West Pipeline could mean less U.S. leverage in diplomatic deals, and fewer incentives for allies to align with Washington when global tensions rise. The East-West Pipeline isn't just infrastructure, it's a symbol of a partner quietly slipping out of reach. While the U.S. closes doors, Canada is laying tracks, quite literally, toward a more independent energy future. Washington may respond with retaliation, pressure, or rhetoric. But the question is, when the world already has an alternative route, who's really going to come back? And if the middleman role is gone, if reliability is broken, if tariffs are driving partners away instead of bringing them closer, then the U.S. is no longer the hub. It's just a stop, forgotten, bypassed, on a route it once controlled.
U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening even higher tariffs on Canada. Valley News that goods that comply with the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade deal will be exempt. New today, Carney says he will convene his cabinet on Tuesday to discuss Canada's response, and he'll be joining the premiers for their annual summer gathering on July 22nd to discuss this.
This wasn't how the deal was supposed to end. Just days away from what was meant to be the final phase of negotiations between the U.S. and Canada, the entire process took a sharp turn. Not with a handshake, but with a new threat. Washington's message was clear: take the offer or face the consequences. And while many expected Canada to blink, Ottawa chose a different path. It didn't walk away, but it didn't fold either. Instead, Prime Minister Mark Carney quietly extended the negotiation deadline to August 1st and began gathering his cabinet and provincial leaders behind closed doors. Because beneath the headlines, Canada is playing for time, and more importantly, it still has leverage. Trump didn't invent trade brinkmanship, but he's turned it into performance art. With each new phase of negotiation, he raises the stakes. Not through formal channels, but through surprise letters, volatile statements, and moving deadlines. It's a strategy designed to keep his counterparts off balance and his domestic base fired up. In just 3 weeks, the end date for Canada's trade talks has shifted from July 16th to the 21st and now August 1st. Behind the scenes, officials in Ottawa believe this is part of a calculated tactic. The goal? Force Canada to concede more. On supply management, on pharmaceuticals, on long-standing trade protections without having to offer much in return. Trump's team sees unpredictability as strength. It creates pressure, it creates confusion, and it creates urgency. But there's a catch. Overuse of the tactic risks making it predictable and less effective. When the 35% tariff threat hit, markets barely flinched. The Toronto Stock Exchange slipped just 0.22%, a sign that fatigue is setting in. And fatigue, in this case, may be Canada's quiet advantage. That doesn't mean things are easy in Ottawa. Prime Minister Mark Carney entered office promising a more stable, strategic approach to Washington. But since then, he's had to watch his government drop its digital services tax, absorb copper tariffs, and freeze steel retaliation, all just to keep talks alive. At home, expectations are rising, and time is running out. There's also one immovable object in the room: supply management. Canada's dairy and poultry markets remain tightly controlled and protected. A new Canadian law, passed earlier this year, prohibits any future trade deal from expanding access to that system. It's politically popular, but inflexible. And Trump has repeatedly singled it out as a sticking point. If Canada won't touch it, and the US won't drop it, that leaves very little room to maneuver. Still, Canada isn't powerless. First, there's USMCA, the trade deal still in effect. Goods that meet its rules of origin are exempt from Trump's new tariff. It's a legal firewall that limits just how far the White House can go. Second, internal unity is strengthening. Alberta and Ontario have signed interprovincial trade agreements. Nova Scotia is coordinating with Ottawa on industrial strategy. These aren't headline moves, but they reduce fragmentation and improve resilience. Third, Canada is diversifying. Exports to the EU and UK are growing. ASEAN outreach is expanding. In short, the US is no longer the only game in town. And fourth, there's fatigue. Global markets are showing signs that Trump's tariff threats no longer hold the shock value they once did. As CBC noted, the fear is real, but the surprise is gone.
I just can't see a deal being done, a real trade agreement being done by August 1st with the Americans. I think what we'll have in a few weeks is nothing more than a handshake. But a handshake deal is, I guess, worth what you might think with Mr. Trump.
So, is this checkmate? Not yet. What Canada needs now is clarity. Not necessarily a perfect deal, but a durable one. One that doesn't depend on Twitter posts or late-night letters. The likely outcome is a handshake deal, something symbolic, flexible, and light on detail. Enough for Trump to declare victory, and enough for Carney to avoid collapse, because in this moment, stability may be the biggest win anyone can hope for. And for Canada, surviving the storm might just be its greatest leverage yet.
President Trump ratcheting up the tariff war with a measure that could be another big blow to Canada. Donald Trump announced a 50% tariff on copper.
Of course, our embassy in Washington is following very closely, as well as the entire team back in Ottawa.
On July 9th, President Donald Trump announced a new 50% tariff on all copper imports into the United States. The policy takes effect August 1st and has already sent shockwaves through global supply chains. But while much of the world is reacting with uncertainty, one neighbor isn't panicking. Canada isn't shouting, it's watching. Because for Ottawa, this isn't just another tariff. It's a test of strategy and of how far Trump is willing to go before Canada decides to push back. In 2023, Canada exported 9.3 billion Canadian dollars worth of copper and copper-based products, according to Statistics Canada. Over half, about 4.8 billion, went to the United States. That trade now sits on the edge of a cliff. Canadian producers fear that if no exemption is reached, their products will become instantly uncompetitive compared to US-based suppliers. Some Canadian exporters, especially those who shifted into copper during earlier rounds of US metal tariffs, now find themselves back under threat. For businesses that rely on the US for a fifth of their sales, the prospect of a 50% tariff could mean lost contracts, layoffs, or even full market exit. This isn't an abstract policy debate. It's the real cost of losing access to a partner that, for decades, served as Canada's largest customer for critical minerals.
If you were to ask Donald Trump that question, I guess he would say he's answered it today in his Truth Social post that he wants to rebuild the American copper industry.
Trump's reasoning is clear: rebuild America's industrial base. In a social post, he framed copper as vital to the future, powering everything from electric vehicles to military systems and data centers. But unlike aluminum or steel, the US still relies heavily on foreign copper. It takes years to build new smelters or expand mining operations. In the short term, manufacturers will face higher prices, and consumers may feel the effects in products that touch nearly every part of modern life. To Canada, this doesn't look like industrial policy. It looks like leverage, a pressure tactic to bring negotiating partners to the table. And the deadline, August 1st, is now a countdown clock for everyone involved.
Being said, every single journalist in the country wants to have more information about the negotiations. The same. We will let the Prime Minister do the negotiation, supported, of course, by our negotiator-in-chief back in Washington, Kirsten Holman, and we will not negotiate in public.
Yet Canada isn't moving publicly. Not yet. Industry Minister Melanie Joly says there is still no executive order, but confirms that Ottawa and the Canadian Embassy in Washington are following very closely. Prime Minister Mark Carney has not responded publicly, a pattern that reflects his cautious, behind-the-scenes style. Canada's lead negotiator, Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, is working in Washington to secure an outcome before the window closes. The government's focus, Joly says, is on protecting workers and supporting companies at the front line of this trade war, from aluminum and steel now to copper. Canada's goal is simple: secure a carve-out, a specific exemption for copper under a broader bilateral agreement. It's not unprecedented. Canada has achieved similar deals in the past. But this time, the pressure is higher. The self-imposed deadline is July 21st. That gives Carney's team less than 2 weeks to finalize a trade and security agreement with the US before the tariffs hit. Donald Trump's strategy is loud. The announcements come via social media, the targets are clear, and the deadlines are firm. Canada's strategy is quieter, but not weaker. Every move is measured. Every response is calculated. As August 1st approaches, the world will watch whether Canada bends or negotiates its way out. In this trade war, timing is power. And while Trump holds the microphone, Carney is holding the clock.